Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Corda. I'm the Director of Business Development here at the Tech Collective. We want to welcome you today. We're thrilled to have Stephen Booth, who is the Chief Security Officer at FireEye, speak to us today. I think we're in for a treat. He's looking for a very interactive presentation time. So what we'll ask you to do is there's a little hand raising button. If you have a question, Steve would really like you to be asking it. Please don't hold off and wait on that. If you're super shy and don't want to raise your hand and speak into it, if you prefer to put it into chat, I will take over that moderation piece and ask your question. But he's challenged us to come up with the biggest, ugliest questions and see if he can, be stumped, maybe. Hopefully he'll have your answers, and if not, he promises we'll get an answer for you. We're very thankful to FireEye for sponsoring this event, to allow Steve to be here and for all of you to be here with us. As for those of you who may not know, the Tech Collective is the IT Industry Association in Rhode Island. We provide training for individuals as well as discussions like this so that you can really be kept abreast of what's the latest information coming to you in technology as well as professional development areas. I am going to hand it over to Steve, and just so that you know, at the end of this, I will put a one question little questionnaire in our chat. If you would take a moment just to answer that, to see if we've met the mark of what you've expected for today, if you got what you wanted from this session. So again, a huge thank you to FireEye and to Steve for giving him his time, and I will turn it over to the man with the plan for the day.
I used to live in Rhode Island, which is actually part of the reason why this is cool. I lived out in Barrington for 10 years. When I used to work for VeriSign, they transferred me out to work in Providence there for several years running the MSS. So although like the most of the people around the world may not actually know what Pawtucket Credit Union is or what getting your coffee milk would be like, but I do actually understand what all those things mean. And before I forget, one of the things that we're actually going to make available to you guys, we have a 250 person intelligence org here. Depending on how you rank them up against countries, we're ranked between number 7 and 10 in the world for open source intel capabilities. We put out these quarterly reports for the customers on sort of like what's happening inside a bunch of verticals. We're going to make them available to you guys. I think we have 4 or 5 different industries that we brought the industry vertical report. So afterwards, we can try to get a copy of those over to you, sort of like which attack groups are going after, what are the major issues happening in my industry, etc. About their 25 slides, about a third of it's think exec board ready, and a third of it's sort of stupidly down in the weeds, like literally which variants on which pieces of malware, that kind of thing. But it's one of those, like, you guys took the time to come listen to me with my blah, blah, blah. So we're going to make sure that we at least pay that back a little bit. The part about asking questions, I mean that. This is actually significantly better when people do that one. So inside Teams, there's a little raise your hand function. And if you pull up the participants list, it actually shows us there. This is way better when people start asking questions, because then different people start bouncing off the questions there, and it just always makes these much more interesting. On the sort of leading security transformation in challenging times, there's a couple of different versions of what challenging times means here. One of them could be, in coronavirus, work from home, how do we do all that? And I can do a chunk off of that. The other part of challenging times gets into with the attackers and with the breaches, and in a world where one of the examples that I give often is the stuff that happened with Equifax. This is about a year ago. I was at the Amazon reInvent, where they were up on stage and they were being presented as having some of the best security controls on the planet, and they still had their big issue. I'm sorry, Capital One. I just mixed those two up. And Capital One did some absolutely outstanding work inside Amazon. You go like, well, challenging times means literally they did among the best possible in Amazon, and they still had a problem. And you kind of go like, all right, is that the challenge on Capital One, or is that Amazon got so complex that it's borderline impossible to ever run it correctly, right? Oh, thank God, somebody asked a question. Gene.
Hi, first name is Wallace. It's okay.
Oh.
Since you were talking, I blame my mom. Since you were discussing, you touched on Amazon and things and cloud services.
Mm-hmm.
I work for the Department of Education in New York, and they're transitioning a lot of services into cloud services.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it seems like they're trusting the cloud providers. We're using Azure. They're trusting the cloud providers to provide a majority of the security parameters. How do you feel moving forward? Is that to me, it's not a good solution to trust the vendor to handle all the security parameters, but they're laissez-faire on the back end, on the front end, if you will, with
Right.
single sign-on and things of that nature.
So, good question. I personally believe that most people's data centers have got, a decade and a half of tech debt in them, and you are nearly always going to be more secure going to the cloud than staying in your old environment with shared Active Directory, shared layer 2, shared everything, right? If you just look at we work 750 breaches a year here. The move laterally, escalate privileges, all that kind of stuff. It's just dramatically easier when everything's shared. Now, having said that one, if you have something done poorly in a data center, then you do a lift and shift into Azure, you're just going to end up picking the blind spots in Azure on top of your poorly set up thing that you had before. If instead you actually make your application being moved over be cloud native, so when you think about it, by default the cloud does nothing. There's not even a default route, right? It does truly nothing. The problem is that a lot of those, a lot of the groups that are moving things to the cloud without knowing what they're doing, what they do is they immediately slam in a bunch of stuff that makes it look just like their data center, right? Oh, we always had one God mode account that we used to get all work done, so go add that in over in Azure. And you're like, no, that's a terrible idea. I was talking to a different customer a few weeks ago. We were talking about they had their web portal that they were storing data on for customers. It got into like how do they design it in a way that's really, really cloud native, like seriously microservices with micro segmentation of accounts. And we were saying things like, when you really take that shared responsibility model, the problem is, and it sounds like what you're talking about is people look at that as a way to just do less work, and that's not generally the way it goes. It just means you take all the effort that you were doing before and you put it on your side of the shared responsibility model. So with this customer, I was talking to them about, they were like, yeah, well, we've got one service account that runs the whole thing. I'm like, that's actually not a good idea. Mm-hmm. You should have individual accounts for individual components of the code running inside your app. And then when we were having a discussion around their per customer data. I'm like, for encryption at rest and encryption at transit, you should have each customer have their own individual keys off of this. So even if somebody misconfigured something and screwed it up and put customer A's data in customer B's repository, they couldn't read it. You don't have a data spill then. You just have customer B would be pissed off because there's a bunch of gobbledygook encrypted information in there. And their reaction was really telling. They're like, oh my God, the manual effort for that would just make that impossible. I'm like, this should not be manual at all. The whole thing should have been automated. Like truly, when they talk cloud with the auto scaling and auto delivery and all the auto everything, that should just be how they design the app. Unfortunately, a lot of people are just trying to figure out, how do I save 20% out of my data center and move it into the cloud by not having to do things. But Azure's not going to patch your operating systems for you, and they're not going to run your code, and they're not going to be in charge of your identity and access management. None of that.
Yeah, understood. It's just basically being lazy, and then it's pretty much like you said, the one universal password, and it's sort of like in where I'm at. There's politics is pretty much trumps everything else. So it's politics versus security, and it's kind of like beating your head against the wall trying to tell these people and just give them the basics to just harden some aspects of the network, even if it is in the cloud.
Yeah, you can often so I actually I just hardcore reject the idea of politics versus security because I'm terrible at politics. I'm blunt object at it. The flip side of that one is when, as a security person, you end up having to be the one that kind of translates to everyone else the art of what's possible. So if you're saying like, all right, you're going to do 6 man years worth of effort in order to get this application pulled in, and with two weeks worth of extra effort, you can literally take entire chunks of risk out of this thing. Right? This is not terribly hard. You're now talking about how to put a few more lines into a Kubernetes config, and they probably aren't using Kubernetes, right?
No.
Next thing that happens always, everybody says this, and I mean literally every company on the planet, even Google and Facebook say this, is that they can't get people with cloud skills. And you go, well, yeah, that's because all the people with all the best cloud skills, they're all highly paid and they have jobs right now, right? The concept of, at a Department of Education, sure, you probably have the Windows guy who's been a Windows guy for 30 years. Time for him to learn Azure skills.
Yeah,
right?
that's the other thing. They don't want to change their mindset, the older generation people.
Yeah, the funny part is it's not even necessarily an older generation thing. Personally, I got into tech because it always changes, and then I got into security because it changes even faster, right? If you've been a Cisco switching and routing person for 20 years, you've largely done the same basic job. I mean, the network architecture's changed a little, and sure, they went to the Nexus architecture, switches, but other than that, it's still Cisco switching and routing, right? In security terms, like, you go like, all right, ransomware didn't exist 3 years ago, right? I mean, like, entire categories of what we have to deal with are truly brand new. The good news is a lot of the controls are the same. Like, you still do get into, how do I do patching for real? How do I, how do you do things better than you used to do? Like, use the patching example. The Equifax setup. I did a dive through what they were on there. When that Apache Struts vulnerability came out, the Department of Homeland Security actually notified them specifically. They were on the list of people that were reached out to that said, hey, this is horrible. You have to go patch it right now. By their SLA, their internal patching SLA, they had 30 days to patch that vulnerability. They didn't patch it for 92 days. The problem was that they had been breached within 48 hours. And you sort of go like, okay, your internal SLA is broken at this point. They're just, you just aren't set up in a way where how you're running your company is lined up with how the attackers operate, right? And it gets really, really challenging when you're talking to your CIO. You go like, we literally need to be able to patch every single technology we have within 48 hours. I would even say 24 hours. And you go like, okay, and by the way, I can't do every single technology in my company, so I'm not throwing a stone in a glass house, but I do have multiple environments where we can just push a button and rebuild the entire thing. And you sort of go like, all right, well, what do I need to do that one? And by the way, this is really freaking cool, and I want to be on that project, right? Because being able to get in there and say like, as security people, I'd rather hand you one line to add into your Docker config or your Kubernetes setup than tell you need to give me your intern for 3 months to go manually check some boxes in a UI. That's just stupid, right? Like, none of us have the time for that.
I agree.
And by the way, the other 38 people on this call, raise hand button, because we're gonna make this one. They told me that people in Rhode Island still had opinions since I moved out of Rhode Island, so I was kind of expecting that. One of the other things that I get into is, since we have the intel that we have, and there's the intel that we have from us selling it, but also the kind of stuff you would have from, like, if you're in the financial industry, you'd have the FS-ISAC information. You get into things like, how can you use the intelligence in ways to make your SOC and your investigations go really well. So I'll give an example of that one, and hopefully this stirs up more hand raising. we had the CEO here who doesn't call me terribly often, thank God. He called me, he says, I have an oddly specific phishing case. He said that he had 6 emails that had come in that all had basically a click here link, but 2 of them showed as coming from buddies of his in college. He's about 50. They live in Germany. They're not on his LinkedIn, and they even got their middle initials correct. And you're like, wow, all right, yeah, that's pretty specific. Okay, boss, we're on it, right? So I run our internal beta program, and we had 4 different ways we did the investigation on this one. One of them was just my own people with our intel. One of them was with the Mandiant consultants. We have those breach consultants. You could basically call them and say, hey, do I need to involve you here, right? That there was that one. One of them is our managed defense service, and the 4th one is something called expertise on demand, where you can just sort of open a ticket and say, tell me what you know about this one. All of them came back in 30 minutes. And after access to the intelligence, they came back and they said, okay, we can say with high confidence you have 2 phishing cases here, not 1. In the first case, your buddy in Germany lost his password in this public password breach, and he probably infected your other buddy, and that's being used as part of a diet pill scam out of this hosting company, I want to say in Belgium. I might have that one wrong. Completely unrelated was unclassified group 1276, UNC 1276, which is a group out of Nigeria doing a different scam at the same hosting company, which is why the URL looks the same. And I send them, give me this like 3-page write-up. And I send it over to Kevin, our CEO, and I go like, all right, don't worry about it. This is one of those things where you're just a guy who happened to be part of a phishing campaign. They're not like attacking the Kevin, right? And my boss goes, okay, roger that, thanks. And from my side, I'm doing like this victory lap. I'm like, holy shit, I got Kevin Mandia to relax on something. Like this doesn't happen anywhere, right? This is my boss who's done testimony in front of the US Congress 17 times about the Russian interference in the elections. And that guy was like, yeah, okay, never mind, fine, thanks, right? Like those are the sorts of things where when you get into intelligence usage and how to be able to get attribution, one of the numbers that I have in my board of directors report is how many times have we gotten attribution on attacks, failed or successful. 44 times in the last 2.5 years, we've gotten attribution. Most companies only get attribution when they end up in the Wall Street Journal, right? It gets a little uncomfortable. Like I've had the Iranian Revolutionary Guard trying to break into my email for the last, update this now, 19 months. I'm gonna kind of panic when they stop trying to break into my email, because I don't know if that means they gave up or they somehow successfully got in, right? But being able to get to those kinds of things, that's one of those discussions that ends up being really fun. How do you raise the bar on what we all do? There's some, and by the way, raising the hand would be a good thing. There's some interesting sort of challenging questions that come out. There's one that came up. We do these nerdy exec things. We grab a bunch of CISOs and usually some 4 or 5-star generals. And we had one of these in Washington, D.C. last year, where we literally had the head of NSA and Cyber Command speaking. The year before, we had Madeleine Albright speaking. So we get fun speakers. And one of the people who's up on stage threw out one of these sort of thought experiments, said if you had your entire budget, your entire security budget in cash, like you had every single technology person, your payroll, everything in cash, would you spend it the same way? And pretty much everybody says no. There's certain things that just I'm not getting value out of, or I'm, whatever. And you go like, so if you wouldn't, what changes would you make? And that gets to be really impressively interesting. And I would even say to your bosses, like if you can come into this thing and you go like, okay, we've got 83 different detective technologies. Here's how many times they've ever had a true positive, or here's how many, here's where we do our investigations. And by the way, we do this. When I do my quarterly metrics off the thing, it gets into how many events does each one of these things have, just pure raw load. How many alerts, meaning the critical ones that we actually do investigation off of, and the subset from there, how many incidents. So it's 3 bars per detective technology that we have. And you pretty quickly be able to look at this thing, and the ones that had the number of alerts and the number of investigations the same, you're probably getting high value investigations out of there, but you're also not getting any leverage from automation off of that, right? We have other ones like the email protection we have and the phishing protections we have. Right now, I just did my board report a couple weeks ago, so I remember the numbers. We're at 14 to 1. So for every one ticket that we work in our phishing queue, we're able to clear out and prevent 14 other issues. And the automation inside that's actually really cool, because you pull up the first one, you got all the information, all that stuff like auto added into the ticket. But then the automation that goes out of there, it goes like, all right, this one's fishy, go get rid of it. Everybody else that has this in their inbox, we have a different set of automation flow as to whether they have read it or not. That's pretty cool, right? To be able to go back into exec reporting and say 14 times we put 0 human effort on this one. Those are the kinds of metrics that end up being important here, not I worked 3,000 antivirus tickets this month. How do you drive that to 0? Like, how do you say, I don't have time to work antivirus tickets because I have to go do more interesting things, like see what got checked into Kubernetes in Azure in the last 24 hours. And everybody goes like, well, I don't have Kubernetes skills. Yeah, no shit, nobody does, right? But you want to be the cloud security guy? That's how you do it. You literally say, I'm going to put 1 hour a day just to see what were the deltas that were checked into Kubernetes in the last 24 hours, so I know what those engineers are doing. In those kinds of terms, being able to do automation at scale is actually way simpler than a lot of people think. I should give scale here. My company's about 3,000 people. My organization's around 30, so I have maybe 1% of the overall population of employees. Inside that 30, my organization, I have GRC, so I do all of the audits and compliance. I do third-party risk, and the part that's killing us lately is all the customer questionnaires. I also have the Security Operations Center, which is monitoring and incident response. That is 7 people plus a manager. I have one person that does threat intel, like how do we use the intel. It's the same group that does like the top secret clearances and those kind of things, called FSO. And I have a security architecture function that really is kind of differentiating here. It's everything from what do we build to how do we run the assessments, how do we run the red teams, because I red team the hell out of this place. What do we deal with the product certifications, everything. I'll explain that program in a few minutes, by the way. And then lastly, I also have physical security. But when you get into the, like, how am I going to add automation to have scale going, my SOC used to be 8 people plus a manager. And whenever I have anybody leave my company, I just rethink my org chart, because the SOC manager goes like, okay, I'm going to backfill my headcount. And my answer is, well, wait a minute. I have an open headcount, not necessarily that group. And I grab my leadership of my team and go, okay, where's the biggest pain point? Do I need an 8th SOC person, or do I need something else? And when that happened last time, what everybody said, except for my SOC manager, he came around to this later, but what everybody said is, no, we need an automation person. So we hired a relatively senior, our engineer levels go from C1 to C5, he's a C4. We hired a Python guy, and his job is to just go make entire chunks of work disappear. And he probably pays his own paycheck every 3 months. And the guy is just absolutely delightful to deal with, partly because he's not the same crunchy security jerk that we've all worked with. You know what I mean? The guy who's just still angry about patching problems from 10 years ago. Like, we all work with that guy, right? In this case, he's my API whisperer. He's the one that goes and connects things. So like his job, we sat him inside my SOC for about 6 months. We said, I just want you to listen to everything they ever complain about and make the problems go away. And we'd get the SOC people that are complaining because queries are taking too long. He's like, well, why are you waiting for queries? How about I have tell me the data you want. I'll have it sitting in the ticket when you open it up. So when the ticket gets created, it goes and runs those queries and the data's already populated in there. And sure, I'm only probably saving 45 seconds per ticket, but 45 seconds times hundreds of tickets a month, that's actually a material savings, right? He gets in there and he does other things off of there, like there's a link in the Intel and the automation. There's one of the examples that I give. A couple years ago, we caught the I don't remember if it was APT 28 or 29. One of the Russian attack groups. We worked a breach where they had come in and they broke into a London-based financial organization, and it was just simple spear phishing. You know, somebody clicks the link. But in this case, they were able to get around two-factor auth because the company had screwed up and put their two-factor auth self-registration portal out on the internet, which is a bad idea. The problem is the company had 45,000 employees. So that's a medium-sized city in Rhode Island. That's a pretty big city. But you go like, okay, their self-registration portal was not terribly well secured. So the Russian attackers got in, the user clicked the link, they just issued themselves a two-factor auth token. From there, they were able to move laterally, they escalate some privileges, they end up getting into Active Directory, and they created a fake secretary, like an executive admin. And then they went into Office 365 and they delegated the CEO's email to this fake secretary, and actually a couple other execs also. And by the way, that secretary added in a phone that they were able to check email from that was in Odessa, Russia. And you sort of immediately you go like, holy crap, right? If your CEO's email or your CFO's email is being on our side, as soon as that intelligence came out, you go like, all right, I need to know what's going on with delegations. So we did a little investigation off of all the delegations that exist or ever had existed, because I needed to make sure nobody had delegated and then undone it. We didn't have any problems in there, although we did find one EA used to work for a different vice president, and she now worked for the current one, and she still had access to the other one, so we cleaned that up. But that was only a medium level investigation, right? That took a few weeks because we had other stuff that had to do. But at the end of this, you go like, all right, now that I know I don't have a problem, how do I make sure I don't have a problem going forward? And the easiest example is you just say like, all right, the Office 365 logs, which by the way count as cloud, the O365 logs creates an event in your SOC. You go, but turns out that happens all the time. Delegations are being moved around all the time. Every time one of our exec admins goes on vacation, they're always redelegating things out, who's covering for which exec, et cetera, right? In our case, it was actually about a dozen tickets a week, which isn't a horrible load, but it's pure wastage. In most cases, this is completely normal, right? So Sergio, my automation guy, gets involved. We go like, all right, well, how do we define a real secretary, a real EA? Well, in this case, it's we had worked several of these events already, and it was, well, go look in Workday. Is she in Workday? Does she have a paycheck coming? Does she have a laptop that checks into Active Directory at least once a week? Does, you know, there's one of the ones we had was, does she have a resume that's in our Smart Recruiter system, right? The HR system that we deal with. And if I have all that information, first off, we started as just auto-populated into the tickets. And then it went down to, well, if I have all that information, close the ticket. I literally have now automated the entire playbook. I would waste my own staff if I had any human being eyes on those at all. That's freaking awesome. Like when you can actually get down to the point where you say, I have literally automated my risk posture, because anything that's outside of this criteria. Question? Or were you just telling people to raise their hand?
No, somebody privately messaged me about the audio, so I just wanted to call your attention, see if everybody is able to listen to. Correct them. You can keep going, Steve. Sorry.
All right, yeah, you were pretty chunky there, so I'm hoping that's not what's happening when I'm talking. But
okay, I'm hopeful.
I'm on a hardwired computer, so like I don't even have any Wi-Fi issues.
Okay.
All right, and actually, this kind of a thing really is significantly better if we have questions. Like, make this more of a dialogue. I highly suggest that people start raising hands and asking questions, because otherwise I'm just going to share cool bloody war stories for the entire time, which I got fun stories, but I personally find it more interesting if we're solving problems, right? There's challenges that each one of you all are having right now. Sometimes it's just, you know, I need 10 people, I've got 2. Right? At that point, your budget's broken, right? I would say that ends up being a problem with the way the executive stuff's going. There's a whole bunch of converse. Oh, it's just saying cut out for me. Yeah, I got it. In terms of, like challenges for attackers and automation and resourcing and intelligence usage, and like how do I grow the security team up so we're not just the the red blinky light people and wait for the alert to go off so that we go do investigations. Instead, how do we up level it? Does this kind of conversation resonate with you all? I mean, are these the same kind of challenges that you're getting inside your organizations? Dimitri, you raised your hand.
Yeah, sorry. So these are actually a lot of the problems that I've seen in my organization and others. I had a question if you could back up a little bit. When you mentioned that the group was able to get in through an insecure two-factor authentication portal. Mm-hmm. Would you describe that so like there's a few different ways you can be insecure. Was it a technical, like a vulnerability kind of a thing, or was there just a process or something where they weren't asking for the right information to vet the user? And so, like, I guess, are you seeing more configuration issues rather than just hardcore hands on keyboard, hacker and movie type stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In general, I would even say by a very wide margin, it's configuration problems. There are certain companies or customers of ours, including some agencies, where they are so ragingly locked down that they're just not, the normal configuration things, that they have literally hundreds of people assigned to just identifying and fixing those things, not even counting the thousands of people building them, right? My organization is 30 people. I don't live in that world. So we end up having to be very good at finding configuration problems. But yeah, over and over again. So for example, Amazon S3 just passed its 10-year anniversary. They have had precisely 0 fundamental breaches of S3. The problem is hundreds of companies have misconfigured their S3 to be open to the internet without authentication. And according to the Amazon shared responsibility model, that's a configuration problem that they did. Now they're correct, but you kind of go like, all right, so what do you do about that, right? There should be a very robust set of guardrails in place where your engineers can't make a mistake. They just can't. Actually, ignore the recording here for a second. We had one here where one of our engineers put a MySQL thing in a dev account. They were just testing out some, they're trying to build some automation around a test suite, right? And he meant to turn it on to be able to log in with SSH and SQL ports, and he opened that up to the internet. Now, we found it when it happened and landed on the guy like a ton of bricks, but it shouldn't have been possible for him to do that one. It turns out that this was an account from a company we had recently acquired. It didn't get the right inherited permissions. It was this whole sort of arcane thing inside the multi-account framework inside Amazon, which kicks us into go like, okay, well, what else didn't come in? Like, what else are we assuming that are the controls that we put in place for those guardrails that were not in place for this one? Because we'd picked up half a dozen accounts from that acquired company, right? Those are the kinds of things where when you think of the security job as our job is to secure the business, like we're not like the most secure business is when you turn everything off and you fill the computers with cement and you throw them in the river, right? That's the most secure version of how to do this. We're here for the business to go do what the business does. So you go like, all right, how do I put those guardrails in place so that they can run as fast as possible? They can innovate as quickly as they can come up with ideas and execute the code to do those ideas. Well, in that world, the answer is never no. It's not no, you can't use MySQL in an Amazon environment. It's you just can't do it badly. So I'll help make sure it's not possible for you to do it badly. When you think of the security problems that come up, the way developers think about bugs, because especially for people that have been in there for a few decades like this, it used to be, oh my God, I found this thing. Well, when you get really good at finding the things, it's just the next thing, right? So when you talk to the people that write code, the people who write the most lines of code, they also happen to write the most bugs. It's just the way it goes. And when they find a bug, they go like, oh, okay, we'll fix the bug. And then you say like, which release is it in, and the bug's fixed. It should be the same thing on our side. Like being able to find those configuration problems, you probably have hundreds of them. Like there just is no company on the planet that doesn't have those. And the really crappy reality is that if you end up getting the right caliber of attacker, and 2 years ago we were saying that the financial actors like Fin7 are basically nation state skills. They're just at that level of getting things done. But if the answer is they just have to go find your misconfigurations, you go like, all right, then it's not that my critical path is that I have to work the very next, antivirus ticket. It means I have to get really good at finding those configuration problems where I would even know if my S3 was open to the internet without authentication, and then be able to do something about it, right? I'll give an example of a program that I get done here, and the punchline is that we're able to run this entire program with about 2/3 of one program manager. So when we started getting into looking at like what were all the incidents that we were dealing with, what were the misconfigurations, what were because I probably have a red team happening here every 30 to 60 days. We do a lot of red teaming around here. And you go like, all right, well, what is it they're able to get into? Almost never was the red team getting in using a piece of malware or 0-day or anything. What we do for our red teams is we give them a standard corporate issue laptop, and we have 2 different accounts that we use that are standard, issued to a brand new person in HR or finance. And then we'll do things like, okay, can you establish persistence in our code pipelines, or can you get to all of the GitHub enterprise source code for the entire company, or can you get into Office 365 and send an email as the CEO, right? Like the red teams honestly are kind of fun. And every time that they find it, what we would end up was we were having these findings documents that I was having to push each one of them individually into like these sort of escalation paralysis. Everybody sort of gets used to the fact that we're escalating more things. We went the other way, and we started treating it the exact same way that development teams deal with bugs. We entered them all in boring little Jira tickets, and then we had to figure out the 20 or so different groups that we work with. You go, okay, in your Jira setup, how do you do your work? How do you do your monthly sprint planning or your quarterly epic planning or whatever, right? So we would meet them at their planning meetings. We would enter the tickets in there. It's amazing how much people will work to try to avoid having to open a ticket. You go like, well, we'll do that, right? And when we would get things like the red team findings, those ones would get entered in as a ticket that get assigned to my architecture team, my security architecture team, who then have to figure out, okay, which groups are in there. So if we had a problem in Jenkins, how many incidents of Jenkins do we have? Who are the owners of those? So we create the sub tickets off of there to go out to all those different teams. So if I had 10 Jenkins instances and I had 1 major ticket, you would end up with 10 tickets off of there. Well, my program just grew by 10. We then just started measuring, all right, who's getting what done, in like I get to set priorities. I expect that every group does at least 1 ticket per month per group. Like, don't be the group that did nothing to de-risk the company. My numbers are amazing. So in the last year and a half, I just updated this a few weeks ago. In the last year and a half, we have closed 425 projects in order to de-risk the company. That's world-class in any company out there. And probably a quarter to a third of them are really easy, right? They're the sort of thing that would be a task, not a ticket. But think about how you have to motivate like the execs, right? There's one slide that I do off here that it's about as simple as it comes. Think of it as 2 bar charts stacked on top of each other. Each bar is a different GM in my company. So think different business units. The top chart is how many have you closed, right? Just showing exactly, giving credit to everybody that's closed tickets out of this program. The bottom one is what's your backlog? And when I did this one a couple of quarters ago, my chief legal counsel she's amazing. She's absolutely awesome, but she is purely non-technical. I mean, amazingly non-technical. She actually opened a service desk ticket once because she needed help being able to get a a application from page 2 of her iPhone to page 1 of her iPhone. She's very non-technical. And she's looking at the data that's up there, and she says, like, well, who's that group in the middle that's closed almost nothing and has a huge backlog? That's exactly what I wanted the leadership of the company to be focused on, because, by the way, that SVP was in the room, and I had told him that this was that it was likely he would get asked about this, right? And on his side, what he said is that you know, he had a resourcing issue, he had all kinds of other stuff, and he was hoping to chain this around to, like, how do I get more staff? The other GMs around him said, like, well, you're the only group left that's still doing software development in a waterfall style. So you don't have any resources because you're wasting them all in all these manual processes you're doing. So the net for us getting the security things done was we made him more effective by forcing him to grow up, right? To get, like, he actually has an SRE org now. Now they do DevOps things. Now they're actually doing agile software development. That's good for the business, as well as it got our security items done. I saw something going to chat. Oh, that's the survey. Chris, you got your hand raised?
Yes, and appreciate the suggestions on kind of integrating with agile methodologies and secure software development. When you look at some measurables in terms of, you know, how you've helped de-risk the company, do you have any suggestions on, you know, how you've rated some of those risks, or how you kind of measured it beyond kind of the number of tickets closed?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's an old axiom in managerial science that gets into, you're going to get more of what you measure, whether you want that or not. So if you're measuring ticket closure, what you're going to do is incentivize closing tickets only. So we did have to go into, like, my architects have to go in to be able to confirm that they closed the ticket appropriately. Like, did they actually do the de-risking, right? And what's the opportunity cost from doing that one? What we do, because I'm trying to up-level my execs past that one as well. What we do is there's I'm not on the sales and marketing team at all, but we have a tool here called Cloudvisory. We bought the company, and it gets into, in all of the cloud environments, for example, what's your risk score on a scale of 1 to 100, in order to be able to say, like, okay, of your configurations, what do you have that is risky? So if you have your S3 bucket open to the internet, that's going to show up as risk. Now, it might be correct if that website was set up for, like, a brochure site, truly public information, but it is actually more risky. You would want to say, like, okay, am I going to accept that risk? Or would I rather have a web service where I don't have S3 putting the objects straight out? They should go through a web service, so now I can properly adjudicate who gets to what data, right? Either way, it's a risk. You can either decide whether you're going to accept it or change your architecture. In that case, when I get to the dashboards for the execs, being able to pit different business units up against each other is actually pretty useful, because there's a lot of people where they're not really planning on moving, but they don't ever want to be the worst, right? It's the whole, if you're outrunning the tiger, you don't have to be the fastest, you just can't be the slowest. I try to modify that a little bit in that I, I hate this, in Excel, conditional formatting, anybody in the bottom third gets shaded red, and anybody in the top third gets shaded green, because I didn't want it to be, don't be the bottom one out of the 10 or so business units. Don't be in the bottom 3 of those ones, right? Because I'm just trying to raise that bar holistically. There's other measures of the, this is more of a CISO conversation than an engineer conversation. How do you measure that the program is working? Gets into things like, what's my Cloudvisory score, but also you go, like, okay, well, how good are they doing on things like vulnerability management? Nobody cares at the exec level how many numbers of missing patches you have. They care, am I got, A, B, C, D, F, or whatever, like whatever. We also, I very hardcore use my vulnerability management program for not just patching. It's in secure config, it's updating OpenSSL, it's all kinds of other things. So think of it as the nerd conversation ends up being deeply in the weeds, tickets, vulnerabilities, patches, individual things that some user can, some engineer can go do something. For the exec conversation, it's how do I represent that same data in a way that the execs care about. And there's even a third conversation for the board of directors, because they only want to know, is this thing I'm talking about going to put shareholder value at risk? Right? They truly don't care about your tech, your nerdery, right? All the stuff that we think is really cool, they don't care about unless it's going to actually cause a problem with the stock price. Does that help?
Thanks, Steve. It does.
Okay. So we have 10 minutes left if I have my clock right. Jason, thank you for asking.
So Steve, to your point, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about external intelligence. We talked a little bit about different ways to communicate your security program and the success of the program from an engineering level, a management level, a board level. Over the course of the last few years, I've really tried to empower my team and really find ways to interject my team more into the business, right? So turn my traditional technology-focused team to start aligning better with business units, risk management, truly get them viewed within our organization as thought leaders, business enablers, right? And for me, it's the relationship side, right? Yep. Once you start having your security team building relationships across the entire business, I think we can better be involved in the day-to-day. So internal intelligence is very important to me, right? Because that's how I find things like shadow IT, bad process, any of those internal threats that we may have, simply because security teams aren't traditionally ingrained in the business, right? So for me, it's about that internal intelligence as well. So really, I have a two-part question for you. What have you done within your organization to better align your security team with the business, right? And have them embedded with the business? Because again, security is a shared responsibility. We need to know what's happening within the HR team, the finance team, all of those different business units, right? And then from there, what are you seeing some of the transition in roles for your teams, right? Like traditional data center security managers are going by the wayside, right? And do you have to start leveling up skill sets to make that happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of the leveling up. If you start the whole thing, and I mean literally everything, from outcome driven, what is, like in actual normal human speak, what is it we're trying to do? If you say things like, well, I need to be able to know my cloud is configured properly. Okay, that all of a sudden means that your SOC, if your SOC's just waiting for red blinky lights to go off, they probably don't know a damn thing about how your cloud is set up. Well, maybe you can take cloud data into your SIM in order to help with the red blinky light setup. You probably can, right? But you also, like, so for example, in my organization, I have 2 people in my GRC organization that have passed the Amazon architecture certification. They're auditors. They're never going to architect anything in Amazon ever, but they can do a really good job on an audit now, right? In fact, actually, we just did one for our email product. We got a PCI certification and an ISO certification completed for the year. And we send out the, hey, good job, you passed another audit. The GM of that business unit said, that's awesome, because I didn't even know we were being audited, right? You want to do the business relevance here. Monica, you have your hand raised? You're on mute.
Finish your answer, and then there's another question in the chat. Someone was quiet.
However, there's a thing on that. You called it internal intelligence. There's a thing on that also, just grunt team building. Okay, so inside my organization, if you work for Mandiant Consulting, these are the high-powered breach consultants that every single thing you've ever read about in the news, we worked the breach on the back end, right? We just don't ever talk customer names. If you work for Mandiant for a year, they buy you a full NFL Rydell football helmet painted our company color with the Mandiant logo on the side. They're amazing. They are $1,500 each. And I don't have that kind of budget, right? So from my side, in my security organization, when you work for me for a year, I go to Amazon and I buy you a Stormtrooper helmet. And it sits on everybody's desk in my group when you've done this kind of stuff. Well, you also end up in the thing where, this was before coronavirus, so probably January, February. I was walking by the network area, and we have given those out to sort of think security champions. Most people have those. And they had a contractor over there, and he's like, hey, what's the deal with those helmets anyways? And he's asking somebody who doesn't have a Stormtrooper helmet on his desk. And so I sort of slow down because I want to hear what he says. He goes, oh, that's the security guys. You got to earn those. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want him to say, right? Like if you want to get a stupid $30 nerd toy on your desk, you got to earn it from the security people. Now, I play this game pretty hard. Like for example, we had one group that was over one of the DevOps group. There's one guy in there that just said like, look, I'm going to take a month and bust out these tickets because he was tired of his queue being as high as it was. So he literally took an entire month to do this stuff. He closed, I don't know, 12, 13 tickets all on his own. It was fantastic. We bought him pizza, not his whole group. That one person who waited until everybody was going to be in the office and we had pizza delivered to his desk. And if he wanted to share it, that was up to him. But he was the badass that had done the multiple tickets on his own, right? Where you sort of go like everybody else going like, well, shit, I want to have pizza bought for me. And yeah, I am completely pitting the other SRE engineers off of there where I'm going like, yeah, I'm the guy who's going to land on you like a ton of bricks if you do something badly, and I'm going to reward it better than anyone in the company. I mean, like you want a gift card for $25, or do you want to have somebody hand you pizza? You get to have your buddies watching you eating, right? In those kinds of setups, being able to celebrate those successes is huge. Now, I don't end up ever being the most positive person in the company. That's just not my job, right? But when I'm saying this is amazing, like when I'm celebrating the 425 tickets that we close off of there, that's world-class amazing. Fortune 50 companies would be impressed by that throughput. When I am like gushing on the teams that got that work done, sure, they only did it because we found the problems, because we prioritized it, we opened the tickets, we put it in their queue. In half the cases, we built their Kanban boards for them, right? And we're saying like you're holding the spoon up to their mouth saying, take this bite next, now take that bite next. Wow, good job, you took the bites we told you to take, right? Well, yeah, that's how you're going to up-level them. When you end up getting the guy that says, I don't know how to do that thing in Kubernetes, and you're like, well, then maybe you want me to open a ticket that says I need to up-level your team? Like I'll take you off your ticket queue for a week so that you do that training that you were supposed to take a year ago, right? And in exec terms, yeah, that's actually a pretty good thing to do. Where you say there's a deliverable, you got to pass that test at the end of this. But yeah, I need another damn Kubernetes engineer much more than I need somebody who knows how to do Cisco switching and routing, because I'm not changing that anymore. I'm trying to shut down those data centers, right? Now, Monica, you said there was another question?
Please, thank you. So Tyler Falcone from APSO asked, Steve, earlier, I think I heard you say that automation at scale is not necessarily as hard as one might think. You mentioned that you hired a Python developer. Any other insights on how to do automation effectively and efficiently?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm afraid we're going to run out of time. So if we have to, we'll do it afterwards. And by the way, Tyler, if you're related to Rob Falcone, hit me on LinkedIn because he used to work for me. Python at scale, a lot of people do it badly because you end up with it all being run off of one dude's laptop, right? Being able to do that one in a way where you're actually doing it at scale, go the other way. Think of using the Python into something that already exists. So for example, if your ticketing system comes over and, ServiceNow, Jira, whatever you're doing for your ticketing system, when that ticket lands, there are triggers you can do. Now that trigger can be now go execute this piece of Python to go grab data and enrich by tickets, for example. If you have that all built into Jira or your ServiceNow or your whatever, it becomes relatively scalable, right? You're going to have to set up a GitHub repository for your stuff because you have to assume that your Python guy will end up leaving at some point. But my Python guy, he's my API whisperer. He's the one who reaches into every API that's in there. We actually literally will never buy another tool that doesn't have an API into it. We're running out of time here. Tyler, hit me on LinkedIn. I'd happily do a quick little call offline in order to do that if you want.
Super. Thank you so much, Steve, for all the information that you imparted to this group. I have a feeling there'll be a lot of thinking going on later today. I would like to just special thanks to Chris Hauser from Amica for making that introduction and to helping you get here, as well as Alan Sanderson and Vanessa Gonzalez from the FireEye team for assisting, and to Criosa Michelazzo from the Tech Collective team, who just always makes it all look like it takes nothing to put this together, and it just makes it all run smoothly. So we thank you.
We have those Intel documents for people afterwards. So the
Yes,
ones
we'll
the ones where we know their industry, just go ahead and send them out over them to them. For the ones that we didn't have the industry for it, let them choose which one they want. They're pretty cool. When you get into those, assume that there's like literally 10 or 15,000 pieces of detail behind them. So this is the roll up of the roll up. But at least it'll give you something to say, here's what's going on in our industry. And we're exactly on time. So thank you all very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing everyone maybe at the CIS Top 20 event, September 8th. Definitely check out the Tech Collective website for other upcoming events. Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.